Most people spend their lives trying to change what happens to them. But real transformation doesn't begin when things change. It begins when you change the way you respond to them. And why is that? Because deep down, constantly trying to change everything is just another way of trying to stay in control. But emotional maturity isn't about control. It's about learning to live well with what you feel, with what moves through you, and with everything that's simply not in your hands. That's a Stoic principle I wish I'd understood in my 20s. But it wasn't until years of studying depth psychology, especially the work of Carl Jung, that it finally started to click. One day, while rereading some old notes, I realized I was crossing a bridge I didn't even know existed. And on the other side, I found a philosophy I had always associated with emotional rigidity, like some kind of cold, rational survival manual. Stoicism. But I was wrong. This philosophy didn't contradict Jung's ideas. It complemented them in a brutally practical way. There's a meeting point between these two views. On one side, Jung's psychological depth. On the other, the everyday steadiness of the Stoics. When these two ways of seeing life intersect, what you get isn't just theory, it's a method. And that's what this video is about. I've broken down this intersection into 5 pillars. They don't promise a better version of yourself. They return what you may have lost. Grounding, presence, clarity, and meaning. The kind of tools no one teaches you when you need them most, especially in your 20s. So watch this all the way through, because even if it feels like it's too late to understand this now, the truth is, it's not too late. And if none of this is making much sense yet, don't worry. Before we go deeper, I need to tell you what Stoicism actually is, not as a motivational catchphrase, but as a living, demanding philosophy of inner transformation. Stoicism was born in ancient Greece with Zeno of Citium, and blossomed in Rome through figures like Epictetus, Seneca, and Emperor Marcus Aurelius. These men weren't speaking from ivory towers. Many of them faced exile, imprisonment, illness, betrayal. They weren't philosophizing from the comfort of a terrace. They were trying not to lose their minds in the face of life's brutality. That's where something truly unique emerged. A practical philosophy. Not a doctrine of abstract ideas, but a mental, emotional, and spiritual training ground for those who want to live with dignity, even when everything falls apart. The core of Stoicism is simple, yet radical. You don't control life's events, only how you respond to them. That's the root of freedom. A Stoic isn't someone who feels less. It's someone who responds with more clarity. They suffer, but don't collapse into chaos. They feel anger, but don't get consumed by it. They know the world is unstable, so they build inner stability. Today, it's common to see Stoicism reduced to Instagram quotes, productivity hacks, or tips on how to stay cool and look unshakable. But that's a distortion. It turns a deep philosophy into an emotional armor, a way to hide fear, avoidance, and insecurity. True Stoicism is about stripping away what's useless, so you can live with what really matters. It's about facing life as it is. No illusions. A Stoic watches their thoughts like an observer from the outside. They train their mind not to fall into its own traps, and they don't do this to control the world, but to avoid becoming a slave to it. And if you've been with us on this channel for a while, you might be noticing. That's exactly what Jung's depth psychology also teaches. Awareness as the observer. Ego detachment. The daily practice of listening before reacting. In the end, we're talking about the same thing with different names. Presence, clarity, real self-knowledge. Now that you understand what Stoicism really is, and how much awareness it demands, we can dive into these 5 pillars. Together, they form a pathway to transformation, a way of living that blends Stoic lucidity with Jungian depth. And it all begins with the hardest part, understanding what's under your control and what's not. On paper, that distinction seems simple, but in practice, it's one of the most difficult tasks of conscious living. Because the mind wants to hold on to everything. It wants to predict, fix, guarantee. It wants to control others, time, the future. But Stoicism cuts that impulse at the root. It reminds us that only one thing is truly in your hands: how you choose to respond to what happens. Epictetus called this the dichotomy of control. Everything falls into 2 categories: what depends on you and what doesn't. Your opinion, your decisions, your effort, your intention, that's yours. What others think, what the world gives, what the past did to you, that's not. In analytical psychology, The ego is the part of us that tries to make sense of things, make choices, take action, but it's not in charge. Deeper forces, the unconscious, complexes, the self, are at work behind the scenes, shaping much of what we experience. When the ego tries to control what doesn't belong to it, internal conflict is born. And when the psyche becomes rigid, symptoms show up and suffering takes hold. That's why Jung saw accepting the ego's limits as essential to individuation. Real psychic strength doesn't come from controlling everything. It comes from knowing where your influence ends and the soul's movement begins. And that takes a kind of discernment that only practice brings. Because it's not always easy to see the line. Sometimes you think you're taking action, when really, you're just resisting the inevitable. Other times you mistake surrender for giving up, but the body knows. The soul feels. When you're forcing something that's not up to you, life feels stuck. When you let go, the flow returns. So what is actually under your control? It's simpler than it seems. Your attention, your response, your silence, your courage to not react the way you always have, the awareness you bring to small moments, the way you rise after a fall. Jung would say, there's an intelligence in life that works beyond the will. And the Stoics would say, trust it, let go. Not like someone who's giving up, but like someone who understands the true size of their role. That discernment between control and surrender, that's the beginning of real transformation. It's when you stop wasting energy trying to fight the current and start rowing with it. Alert, present, and clear. Only then can you walk with steadiness, even when you have no idea what's coming next. In Stoicism, there's also a principle called Amor fati, the love of fate. The idea isn't just to accept what happens, but to learn to love each event as part of a design filled with meaning. It's easy to confuse that with passivity, but it's the opposite. It's radical presence, an active surrender, where you stop fighting the facts and start walking alongside them. Carl Jung never used that term, but he pointed to the same truth. He said that whatever we refuse to face turns against us as fate, and that accepting our psychic destiny, everything that rises from the unconscious, everything that seems to choose us, is the key to true transformation. To reject what is to fracture yourself. To accept it is to become whole again. When you refuse to live what life has brought you, you split in two. The part that wants to control everything, and the part that's being called to walk through something it doesn't yet understand. The tension between those two selves is what makes the soul sick. Both Stoicism and depth psychology agree. The most paralyzing suffering isn't what happens. It's the resistance to accepting what happened. Acceptance doesn't end the pain. It ends the war. The practice of Amor fati doesn't ask you to enjoy loss, failure, humiliation, or crisis. It asks you to stop hiding from them, to stop treating them as system errors, and start seeing them as part of the path. Jung said the encounter with the shadow, that part of us holding everything we've rejected, is inevitable. The more you run, the more it chases you. What you avoid, repeats. What you face, transforms. Accepting fate is an act of psychic humility. It's saying, I didn't choose this, but it chose me. Now I need to understand why. That's where reintegration begins. Not with the ideal, but with the real. The soul doesn't crave perfection. It craves coherence. And coherence only exists when you're willing to live what's here, not what you imagined. Crisis in this light isn't an interruption. It's the path revealing itself. But none of that can be seen if you're not here. Present. Whole. Because only in the now do things show their true form. Outside of it, everything turns to projection, noise, distraction. Being present isn't just a nice idea. It's a daily challenge. A silent battle against everything pulling you away from yourself. And the present moment, strangely enough, is the place we avoid the most. We live pulled by past ghosts or future mirages. The body's here, but the mind is always trying to escape. Marcus Aurelius, the Roman emperor and Stoic philosopher, understood this deeply. His journal, what we now call Meditations, wasn't written for anyone else. It was a private dialogue, almost a plea to himself, a way to remember who he wanted to be, to correct his inner course, to reinforce his principles. It was a practice in presence, not a pose of wisdom. He wrote so he wouldn't lose himself. That's the real value of attention. It anchors you, brings you back. When you're truly attentive, you don't drown in impulse. You start noticing the patterns, the traps, the automatic reactions. You create space between stimulus and response. And in that space, freedom lives. Jung spoke of this same vigilance. He said the unconscious is always speaking, but in subtle, symbolic ways. A gesture, a mistake, a discomfort, a strange repetition. But if you're absent, rushed, distracted, you miss the signs. And what isn't seen repeats. Radical presence means committing to see what's here, in your body, your thoughts, your surroundings. No running, no pretending, no escaping. And this isn't a gift. It's a practice. It's learning to see through the surface, even in everyday moments. Writing, observing, staying quiet, breathing, all of it can be a tool. What matters is showing up for the present as if it were a sacred responsibility, not abandoning your own awareness. There's a kind of peace that only shows up when you stop fighting the present moment. Not because it's light, but because it's finally real. True attention reveals everything, including yourself. And with that comes discomfort. Because seeing yourself clearly also means seeing the anger that rises unfiltered, the guilt that drags, the fear that paralyzes. Emotions aren't the problem. The problem is what we do with them when we're disconnected from ourselves. Modern Stoic culture, the shallow kind, tends to sell self-control as coldness, an ideal of indifference, as if feeling things is weakness. But a true Stoic doesn't erase emotion. They recognize it, interpret it, and choose not to be enslaved by it. Same goes for depth psychology. Jung never suggested suppressing feelings, quite the opposite. For him, transformation begins when we stop identifying with what we feel and start observing it. Anger isn't your true self. Anxiety isn't your essence. They're content, expressions, signals, messages from the psyche. You don't have to react to everything you feel, but you also don't have to pretend you don't feel it. That's the hardest balance to strike. Stepping out of reactivity without falling into repression. Learning to contain, not suppress. To contain something means holding it consciously. To repress is to push it away out of fear. Containment creates space. Repression creates shadow. Carl Jung called these emotional hotspots complexes. They're places where old pain still pulses. When someone provokes you and you overreact, it's rarely about now. It's a complex being triggered. The emotion comes from the past, but it wants to hijack the present. Stoicism teaches you to return. Breathe. Don't act on the first impulse. Ask yourself, what's moving me right now? That distance isn't coldness. It's clarity. And clarity is a form of self-love, because every emotion carries information. And the more you listen, the less it needs to scream. To transcend isn't to erase. It's to rise into awareness. To turn "this happened to me" into "I choose how to meet it." To replace "I was swept away" with "now I see." That's what breaks the reactive cycle. You stop being pushed around by emotion and start using it as a compass. And suddenly you realize it was pointing to something bigger all along, a crossing. Because it's not just about hard moments. At some point, life will break you. You'll fall. You'll lose. You'll face something that can't be fixed the usual way. And that's where everything begins. The Stoics said, the obstacle is the way. Not as a pretty metaphor, but as lived truth. What blocks you, reveals you. What wounds you, teaches you. Adversity isn't a flaw in the plan. It is the plan. And if you don't understand that, you'll spend your whole life running from the one thing that could actually change you. Carl Jung called this moment, the confrontation with the unconscious, a crisis of individuation. It's when the persona collapses, the mask you wore to get by in the world. Something breaks, and what was hidden, rejected, denied, avoided, begins to rise. It's not pretty. It's not inspiring. It's chaos. But it's necessary. Pain has a function. It forces rupture. It demands change. It pulls you out of the surface and drags you into the depths, where the images you've avoided are waiting. Jung said, there is no coming to consciousness without pain, because it's in deep emotion that something real is touched, something that can no longer be ignored. That moment of collapse, which feels like the end, might just be the beginning of the real path. Not because you come out unscathed, but because you come out changed, less deluded, more aware, more whole. The key is this: adversity isn't punishment, it's initiation. It's the symbolic moment when the soul says, no more pretending. This is for real now. And whoever listens is reborn. In pieces, yes, but reborn. That's the crossing. And those who walk through it, with presence, with listening, with the courage to feel everything without running. They find something that can't be bought, taught, or inherited. Integrity. Another Stoic principle reminds us, time is finite, and living with wholeness means not running from yourself anymore. But there's a more subtle form of denial, one most of us live in, pretending we have infinite time. Living like this is just a rehearsal, like there's always a later, but there isn't. The Stoics warned, finitude is what gives life its value. To forget that is to waste the now. Time isn't guaranteed. It's a gift that slips through your fingers, and living well means knowing this, even silently, every morning. The awareness that time is limited changes how you choose. It forces you to cut through noise, to stop postponing essential conversations, to stop wasting energy on fake relationships, empty obligations, and tired performances. This kind of clarity doesn't throw you into panic. It brings you into alignment. It makes you ask, without drama, if this were it, would it still be worth it? The truth is, life only becomes full when you accept it isn't promised. And that's what makes every gesture matter. Every presence matter. Every choice leave a mark. Forget your mortality, and you sleepwalk through life. Remember it, and you wake up. And waking up isn't about becoming better. It's about living without distraction, without so much fear of messing up, without clinging so hard to expectations. It's living with wholeness, as someone who knows everything can change in a second, and still chooses to show up fully now. That kind of urgency doesn't make you rush. It makes you go deeper. When you recognize time is limited, you start choosing more carefully. What used to be distraction now feels like wasted time. What used to be image starts to feel heavy, and what used to be appearance starts to feel false. That's where virtue is born, not as some external rule, but as an internal necessity. The Stoics placed virtue at the center of everything. For them, living well meant living with courage, justice, wisdom, and self-restraint. No matter what happens on the outside, the only thing fully within your control is your character. Jung saw it differently, but the core was the same. He didn't define virtue by moral values, but by coherence between ego and self, between the image you project and the truth that lives in you. When those two align, you live in integrity. And that integrity generates inner strength, not arrogance, but presence. To be virtuous in this sense isn't about being perfect. It's about stopping the self-betrayal. It's not saying yes when every cell in your body says no. It's not smiling when what moves through you is sadness. It's not repeating beautiful quotes when you haven't embodied them yet. True virtue is quiet. It doesn't announce itself. It lives in the held-back gesture, in the word that doesn't manipulate, in the decision that doesn't harm just to win. It shows up when no one's watching, and stays when everything falls apart. But living like this requires vigilance, because it's always easier to repeat nice ideas than to live in coherence, especially in life's uncomfortable corners. In the end, virtue means choosing wholeness, even when it costs more than lying to yourself. The soul recognizes coherence. And people do too. You've felt it before. That presence that doesn't need to prove anything because it's fully there. That voice that says little, but means everything. That quiet strength that shows there's something steady inside, even when everything outside is uncertain. That kind of steadiness can't be faked. It has to be lived. And it always comes from the same place, being at peace with who you are, what you know, and what you choose. Even when no one's clapping. Life is unstable. No matter how much you prepare, it will always find a way to surprise you. The point isn't to avoid that. It's to not be destroyed by it. And one of the most powerful and least romanticized practices in both Stoicism and depth psychology is this. Look directly at what could go wrong. Rehearse the chaos before it arrives. The Stoics called this the premeditation of evils. Every day, imagine loss, failure, illness, death, rejection, not as a morbid obsession, but as preparation. Not to live in fear, but to train the soul not to break when the inevitable comes. Jung proposed something similar in his practice of active imagination, symbolically visualizing the very scenarios that haunt you, sitting with the pain before it arrives, letting the emotion emerge, in body, mind, and image, so it can be integrated, not repressed or projected. The key here is not to mistake this practice for negativity. You're not calling disaster into your life. You're making room for it. The more familiar you are with your shadows, the less control they have over you. The more consciously you face what scares you, the more prepared you'll be to act, not just react. It's resistance to feeling that creates panic. When you refuse to imagine the worst becomes unbearable. But when you walk through that territory symbolically, when you let the emotion rise before the storm, you build inner muscle, a strength that doesn't come from numbing out, but from knowing the dark. This isn't about anesthetizing emotion, it's the opposite. Feeling it now so you don't drown in it later. Rehearsing the void so you don't get lost in it. Looking fear in the eye so it doesn't have to haunt you from behind. This is invisible training, quiet preparation, the kind no one sees. But that holds you steady when everything shakes, because the world won't send a warning when it falls apart. But you can choose not to be blindsided by what you already know is coming. After facing what you feel, without running, without romanticizing, it's natural to seek balance. But here's the subtle trap: using reason as a shield, as an escape, as if thinking your way through everything could save you, as if understanding something were the same as transforming it. The Stoics valued reason deeply. It was the core of their practice, but not as cold logic. Reason meant discernment, clarity, direction, not to control the world, but to stay whole within it. Reason isn't for avoiding feeling. It's for turning emotion into lucid action. Jung echoed that. He respected thought, but warned about intellectualism. When you analyze everything but touch nothing. When you interpret emotions, but don't live them. When you understand the symbol, but don't let it affect you. In those cases, reason becomes a wall, not a bridge. Overthinking can be a sophisticated way of running from yourself. True reason begins when it becomes a rudder, something that helps you steer your inner world with steadiness. When it organizes the chaos, but doesn't deny it. When it questions, but also listens. When it kneels before what it doesn't yet understand, instead of trying to dominate it with logic. Reason can guide, but it can never replace experience. You have to know when thinking helps, and when it only delays. When a question opens you up, and when it's just a way to avoid the answer you already know, but aren't ready to face. Mature reason listens to intuition. Healthy reason checks in with emotion. It's not a tyrant, it's a partner. That kind of balance is rare, because it means refusing to use the mind as a disguise. Choosing instead to use it as a tool. Sharp, useful, but always in service of inner truth, not ego defense. When thought and feeling walk together, a different kind of clarity emerges. A living intelligence. One that doesn't distance itself from the soul, but translates it with respect. That's when reason becomes noble, when it stops protecting and starts guiding. After all this, what's left is what no one escapes. Pain. It comes with no manual, and the first temptation is always the same. Numb it. Run. Fix it fast. But some pain can't be fixed, only crossed. And Stoicism, like depth psychology, teaches this clearly. Relief is survival. Meaning is transformation. The Stoics didn't see suffering as punishment. They saw it as a test of character, a symbolic trial of who you're becoming. Not in a cold, tough-it-out way, but as intimate learning. When life pressures you, what emerges isn't a mistake, it's the truth. Jung said every pain carries a purpose, that it's not enough to feel, you must symbolize, give it form, image, language. When you just feel without understanding, it wears you down. When you give it meaning, it reveals you. Because pain, at its core, is a call to snap out of autopilot, to shed the old skin, to be born again, even if it hurts more than any ending. The key is in the listening. Not all pain screams. Some repeats in silence. Others become symptoms, exhaustion, self-sabotaging patterns. And they only stop when you stop, face them, and ask, what's trying to be born here? Meaning doesn't erase pain, but it shifts your place in the story. You stop being a victim of what broke you, and become the guardian of what it taught you. The pain still pulses, but now it points. And when it points, you stop spinning in circles. You start walking. This is the moment where Stoicism meets the symbolic, where discipline meets soul, where enduring becomes growth, and growth becomes remembering who you've always been, beneath everything you've had to endure. By now it's clear. Stoicism isn't self-help. It doesn't promise quick fixes. It doesn't live off positive thinking. It's a daily demanding practice of inner transformation, one that requires presence, effort, honesty, and emotional courage. And its greatest advantage over many other philosophies is this. It gives you real tools, tested across centuries. Tools to help you live with more steadiness, more clarity, and more integrity. Let's recap. There's the Stoic Journal, a simple but powerful practice. Writing every day what you think, feel, learn, and need to remember. Also to check your own alignment, like a continuous attention workout, the way Marcus Aurelius did. There's the dichotomy of control. Accept with serenity what's in your hands, and release the anxiety of trying to change what's not. There's voluntary discomfort, fasting, cold showers, silent walks, to train your body and mind to tolerate life's real pain without panic, without escape, and maybe most transformative of all, the invitation to see pain as part of the process, not as failure. At the end of the day, what this path reveals is simple, but deep. Stoicism and Jungian psychology speak different languages, but they point in the same direction. Stoicism gives us structure, direction, steadiness. Jung gives us depth, symbolism, inner complexity. One teaches us not to react to every breeze, the other, to listen to the underground currents of the soul. One trains us to endure, the other, to understand. Together, they form a path of transformation that's both practical and spiritual. And here's where many people get it wrong. Today, Stoicism has become trendy in some corners of the internet. An ancient philosophy turned disposable motivation, catchphrases, emotional detachment, performed discipline. But real Stoicism isn't that. It's hard, honest, demanding, and maybe because of that, it's also liberating. Its edge over other philosophies is this: it gives you actual tools, things you can practice, today, right now. Jung would say all of this points to one thing: the return to center, the moment you stop trying to become someone else, and start remembering who you've been all along. This isn't a quick journey, or a comfortable one, but it's real. And if you've made it this far, maybe that journey has already begun. Now I'll leave you with a question. Which of these ideas spoke to you most today? What's still asking to be heard inside you? The answer may not come right away, and that's okay. But when it comes, be present, because that's where it all begins. If you've made it this far, leave a comment with the phrase, "I accept what came, and I remain whole." That's how we'll know who stayed until the end, who didn't skip the hard part, who truly listened. And if you feel this content has value and want to help it reach more people, you can click the thanks button below. Any support, even small, makes a real difference. It helps the channel grow and reach more people, but only do it if it feels right to you. The point has never been to sell transformation, just to keep showing up with truth and purpose. See you in the next video.